Hello, everybody, and welcome to the channel Democracy and Education. Today, I'm going to present the first chapter of the book, Education for Democracy in the 21st Century. My name is Helen Ozia, and I am your lecturer for political science and international relations. Welcome to the channel. Well, the name of the first chapter of the textbook, Education for Democracy in the 21st Century, is What is Politics All About? Disclaimer, all of the images used in this presentation are either artificial intelligence generated or have a Shutterstock or other license. But the first question that I would like to discuss is, why study education for democracy? Well, there are many reasons why we would like to study education for democracy or know about democracy and how this political system works. One of them could be that you will soon come of age and you will vote for the first time, and you might be unsure of who you will vote for. Or maybe you and your family have moved from an authoritarian to a democratic country, and you want to know what rules apply in your new country of residence. Or you are probably dissatisfied with how the politicians of your country are running the country with a public administration, and you want to know what you can do about it as a citizen. Well, this is an image of a naturalization ceremony in the United States. You see here naturalized U.S. citizens who are swearing an oath of allegiance to their new home country, which is the United States. Now, what does this imply? Well, these people come from other countries, and they took a language test, a citizenship test, to make sure that they know the rules that apply in their new country, which is the United States. And here you see them swearing an oath of allegiance. Now, does naturalization mean that you lose your original nationality? Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be that way. It means that you become a citizen of your host country, but in some cases, like in the US, you are allowed to keep your first nationality and thus have dual citizenship. However, becoming a naturalized citizen does not only imply rights, it also implies responsibilities, like, for instance, obeying the laws of the host country, paying taxes, and being informed of what rules apply. The name of the chapter is What is Politics All About? And when we hear politics, the noun politics, the expression politics, the first thing we might think about is whether politics is limited to the struggle for power. Or are we talking about public administration? What is public administration? Well, it is the management of public resources. For example, taxes, the citizens pay, and other resources the government obtains, for example, through fines that citizens pay. And public administration is the policy a certain government will follow, especially regarding how these funds or these resources will be spent. I have here some examples, as you can see. For instance, education and culture. How much is going to be invested in education and culture? Social affairs and public health. urban design and business activities, for instance, housing, and other administrative services. Okay, this is what we call the public sector. Now, going back to the struggle for power, there are different factors of political struggle. Perhaps the most important ones are economic factors. Why? Because resources are limited while needs are not. Thus, the question that politics answers is who gets what? Here we have an example of different socioeconomic classes. We have two citizens of the same country. One of them is a blue-collar worker, and the other one here is a businessman. You can imagine that their upbringing, that their values, that the school they went to are different. Thus, the businessman will most likely have different political preferences from the blue-collar worker and might vote for a different political party. However, not only economic factors are important, ideological factors have become quite important in the last decades. Now, what are ideological factors? Well, the name suggests, they have to do with our ideas. Conservative parties and liberal parties have opposing agendas. You have here an example of a conservative voter who's for the right of bearing arms, who's for the defense of the traditional family, who's for a lower taxation, while this citizen here is more liberal. She is probably for same-sex marriage and adoption. She's against guns, and she is for more taxation, for a greater redistribution of the resources. In ethnically diverse countries, political parties also have a cultural profile, or probably a religious profile, like in many European countries where there are Christian parties. And in the last decades, there is a very significant divide between nationalist and globalist parties, which have opposing interests. Now, how does the struggle for political power look like in different political systems? We have here to the right citizens, American citizens voting, deciding who they want to have as their leader, while here to the left, we have an example of the struggle for political power in an authoritarian country. It looks like it's in the Middle East. You see the people here carrying guns, machine guns, burned homes and buildings, okay, which means that the struggle for political power is violent in non-democratic countries. While here, citizens are accustomed to vote every 4 years and to accept the results of the elections, even if they don't like them. In democratic systems, the struggle for political power is peaceful and takes place every 4, 5, or 6 years. The citizenry and the defeated candidates accept the result of the elections, whatever that is, whether they like the candidate who won or not. This is Mrs. Claudia Sheinbaum, the first female president of Mexico who won the election by almost a landslide, by 60% in 2018. As I said before, the struggle is peaceful. It takes place in regular elections. And the 40% of the voters who did not like the result of the election and who didn't want Mrs. Sheinbaum to become the president of Mexico had to accept the result of the elections. Why? Because Mexico is a democracy. Now, what happens after the election? Here we see Mrs. Sheinbaum as president-elect, and after a certain period of time, like we see here, the transfer of power takes place and she becomes, now you have this image where she officially becomes the president of the Mexican Republic. But what about the struggle for power in non-democratic systems as we see here? Well, it's violent. Opponents are usually eliminated, incarcerated, or even killed. And one authoritarian government substitutes another authoritarian government. Thus, the situation does not improve. People do not elect their representatives in neither authoritarian, totalitarian, or theocratic systems. Okay? There are no elections in which the people decide who's going to become the leader, because the leader is whoever is stronger and more violent, like we can see in this illustration. Since the only way to obtain power is through violence and intimidation, well, there are no political contests. There is no debate. There is no dialogue in authoritarian, totalitarian, or theocratic systems. But let's focus on the role of the citizen in a democracy. Well, let's begin by stating that in democracies, political leaders are called public servants. Why? Because they're supposed to serve the people who elected them. Why? Because power originates from the people and power is transferred to their leaders, so public servants represent the interests of the people and act on behalf of the electors. Now, if public servants do not deliver what they promised, or if they turn out to be corrupted or incompetent, they can be legally removed in a democracy. That is definitely not the case in an authoritarian, a totalitarian, or a theocratic government. Here we have an example of an authoritarian leader, that is Prince Mohammed bin Salman from Saudi Arabia. Mohammed bin Salman was not elected by the Saudi people. He inherited power from his father, King Faisal. He does not represent the interests of the Saudi people. He represents the interests of his own family. And nobody in Saudi Arabia can demand accountability from their leader, because if they do, they might end up in jail or executed. Why is education for democracy important? Well, for many reasons. Knowledge empowers the citizen. As the Spanish pedagogue Manuel Castells once said, knowledge is power. If you as a citizen know what your rights are, you can defend them much better than if you're not even aware that you have certain rights. And educated citizens demand accountability from their leaders precisely because they know what their rights are, and they know what the responsibilities of political leaders are. And it's not surprising that political leaders are many, many times against education for democracy, because a citizenry that is educated and well informed is not as easily fooled than a citizenry that does not have the slightest idea of what their rights are. Now, is democracy a better political system than an authoritarian, totalitarian, or a theocratic system? You have to decide for yourself if it is. Why? Conflict is inevitable because we people are all different from each other, and we have different priorities, different values, and different interests. However, while conflict is inevitable, violence is not. In democracies, we solve our problems and settle our differences through dialogue and debate. Another important reason why democracy is probably the lesser evil compared to other forms of government is that the only path for a people or a nation to flourish is through peace. Democracy guarantees the peaceful transfer of power, which is not the situation in authoritarian or totalitarian governments or even theocratic systems. But most importantly, in a democracy, it is possible to have different political views without being enemies. Why? Because one of the pillars of democracy is the principle of pluralism. What is pluralism? Pluralism is ideological diversity. You might be liberal, I might be conservative, you might be nationalist, I might be globalist. We do not have to be enemies in a democracy. And another fundamental pillar of democracy is the division between the public and the private realm, which in practice means that citizens can live their lives according to their choices. Nobody can tell you if you have to get married, if you have to go to church, what temple or church you should go to, if you want to fast, what profession you have to elect, etc., because that is part of the private realm. Now that I have presented the main pillars of democracy and what it implies, it's important to go through the glossary presented in chapter 1. Accountability. What is accountability? It is the responsibility of a politician for the choices that he or she makes on behalf of the people. Why? Because politicians decide how to spend our taxpayer money. A dissident is a person who is critical of the government in non-democratic systems. Why? Because there is no opposition. In democracies, people who belong to other political parties are called opponents or the opposition. Ideology is a system of ideas, of opinions and beliefs, which is not based on evidence or science, but on personal preferences or values. Pluralism is ideological diversity, which means the existence of different political parties with different agendas in a country. And political parties are the entities that can directly participate in elections in a democracy. Power in the political context means the capacity to influence others without being influenced by them. And public administration is the management of a state's affairs, for example, the healthcare system, public education, housing, etc. And the state are all of the institutions that rule over a territory and its people. For instance, the ministries. Do not confuse the state with the government, because the government is the party or political parties who are in charge of public administration over a certain period of time. We now go to the questions. First question is, what is public administration and how is it different from business administration? The second question is, what is an example of economic power? The third one, name 3 factors of political struggle. And the fourth question is, how is pluralism different from diversity, for instance, ethnic diversity or religious diversity? I want to thank you for your attention and remind you to buy your book, Education for Democracy in the 21st Century. See you soon when I present Chapter 2.